Well, hey parents, so good to be back with you. I want to just take a minute here to talk about a topic that we're going through even with the youth. The topic is anxiety. Now, the reason we bring this up, some of you may be asking, well, Brother Tim, you're not normally a topic kind of guy, so why are we talking about topics with the youth? Well, one of the most glaring reasons for talking about topics with the youth is because 81% of students from grades 6 through 12 struggle with anxiety. That's a very big percentage. Suffice to say, that's most students struggle with that. Now, there are many different things and there are many different types of anxiety. I don't want to necessarily spend too much time today talking about all those, but anxiety can easily be defined as a troubled or engrossed state of mind. What this really means for our students is it's when their stress cripples them. It allows them not to really do anything they want to do. They become so stressed about things that they're unable to function like they normally would and make decisions like they normally would. Now, sometimes anxiety is brought on by oneself. Sometimes things that we do, I hear students sometimes say like, oh, I didn't study for this test and now I'm really stressed about it. Well, some of that anxiety is based upon what we do, but oftentimes anxiety is based on others. The way that I kind of like to think about it is, if you've been in or seen our Gaga ball pit, you know it's a big pit and you hit the ball off the wall. And for a person who doesn't struggle with anxiety, life is just like hitting the ball by yourself off the wall. It's pretty easy to deal with. Even if you threw more than one ball in there, it wouldn't be impossible to keep hitting it and bounce it off the wall. But someone who struggles with anxiety, it's as if those walls closed in on them. And even though they may have the same amount of Gaga balls to hit, it just comes back at them even quicker. They're unable to stay ahead of it, and so it seems as if there's just multiple coming at them. And when we talk about anxiety and when the church fathers talk about anxiety, they discuss it as one of the most prevalent and one of the worst sins. It's a sin that not only can be a sin in and of itself, but it often is a precursor to more sin. So anxiety can be a sin in itself because it is us saying, hey God, I'm going to deal with this stress. You can't, so I am. And that's obviously us now being prideful and taking away and chipping out at who God is. But it's also a precursor to sin because frequently our anxiety causes us to act out in anger, to act out in frustration, and among many other things, to just make decisions that we weren't designed to do. And God takes anxiety seriously. We see just one example. There are numerous passages and they'll be included in the PDF. But one example is in Leviticus 26, verse 36. God says this, I will put anxiety in the hearts of those who survive in the lands of their enemies. The sound of a wind-driven leaf will put them to flight, and they will flee as one flees from a sword and fall, though no one is pursuing them. God realizes that anxiety is something that really cripples us. So the question for us as the spiritual leaders of students is simply this: what can we do about it? Now, I'm not giving you everything. I'm not giving you just a crash course. I want to be done here in like 2 minutes. But let me suffice to say just a few things that maybe will help us work with students who struggle with anxiety. The first of this is listen. Oftentimes, anxiety can be just conquered by someone listening. Because as a student begins to describe all that they need to do and all that's stressing them out, it begins to feel smaller. They begin to realize each one of them can be dealt with. That moves us to our next part is although at times we may need to correct, we may need to give a subtle rebuke and say, well, maybe we're stressed about this test because we didn't study for it. Perhaps this isn't really that real. Maybe we need to work next time to study for it. But the best thing we can do as parents is to, instead of saying, oh, your problems aren't real and that's made up and that's your fault, instead say, okay, how are we going to deal with this? How can we take a look at it each and every little thing? But the problem is that not all of your students' issues are going to be able to be dealt with just by taking them out one by one. Your students undoubtedly deal with issues that they can't conquer, that you can't conquer. And so what we have to do is whenever we see students and we're working with our students, and out of love we've listened and we've heard their heart, and we're asking, how are we going to deal with this? The best question is not to ask how are we, but how is God going to deal with this? Jesus tells his disciples not to be anxious about anything. He reminds them of the birds of the air, that they fly around and yet they still have a place to live, that the dew doesn't do anything, but it can still eat. You see, what Jesus is trying to get at is he can take care of all things. And no, the appropriate answer to an anxious student is not trust in God more, but it is to lovingly remind them that by knowing who God is and understanding who God is, then they can recognize how God is going to take care of their problems, how God can take care of each thing. So the important question is not to ask, how do I overcome, or how do you overcome, but it's how does God overcome this? How can God help us through? And then the simple thing to do with your student is, once you've determined, hey, this is how God can help us through, show them how to lift that up to him. Now, is that going to fix everything immediately? No. Is that going to make everything just immediately perfect? Of course not. But guess what? Anxiety is not something that we can just push to the side. Your students, if they're struggling with anxiety now, they'll be struggling with it later. It's going to be a sin that tempts them. And so the best thing we can do is model for them the way in which we combat it, which is to say, hey, I'm going to listen, I'm going to hear it, I'm going to look at the things, and I'm going to ask the question, how can God fix this? How can I fix this if it's small? If it's something as easy as doing my homework, well, I got to do it. But how can God fix the big things? And then we just simply trust him. We say, hey, God, I'm going to tell you about it. I'm going to tell you all my fears with it. I'm going to tell you everything that's going on in my life about it. And I'm going to give it to you. Now, if you do all that and you're still stumped, guess what? That's what I'm here for. That's what Brother Adam is here for at Nolan River Road. That's what we like to do, is to help you through that. But these are the first couple steps to helping your student deal with anxiety. I hope that this meets you well. I hope that this is an encouragement to you. And of course, if you have any questions or need anything, please just holler at me. I'd love to help you and your student walk through this together.